Bright light exposure, particularly natural sunlight or artificial bright light, directly influences brain circuits that regulate alertness and dopamine release, creating a rapid shift in energy and motivation. Specific breathing techniques such as cyclic hyperventilation or physiological sighs can rapidly shift the nervous system state, either heightening arousal or calming stress, to create instant readiness and focus. Brief cold exposure triggers a surge in norepinephrine and dopamine, sharpening alertness and elevating motivation for sustained periods. Standing tall, moving rhythmically, or even short bouts of intense physical movement activate neural circuits tied to energy, self-belief, and focus. Directing attention toward a specific, actionable goal, even very small, recruits the brain's reward system, aligning dopamine release with effort and producing instant motivation. When we talk about creating instant motivation and alertness, one of the most powerful and scientifically backed tools we have is light. Light is not just something that allows us to see the world. It is a direct controller of the biological systems that set the tone for how awake, motivated, and focused we feel. The brain has specific circuits that are hardwired to respond to light. These pathways don't just influence vision, they go deeper into the centers of the brain that regulate arousal, mood, and dopamine. Dopamine is the key neuromodulator associated with motivation and drive, and norepinephrine is the chemical that heightens alertness and focus. Both are powerfully regulated by light exposure. When bright light hits the eyes, specialized cells in the retina detect it. These are not the typical cells that create visual images. Instead, they are light sensors that project directly to the brain's master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This clock does more than regulate sleep and wake cycles. It signals to other parts of the brain and body to release chemicals that create an energized, ready state. Within moments of exposure to bright light, especially natural sunlight, there is an increase in cortisol. Many people think of cortisol as only a stress hormone, but in the morning, cortisol is what helps you feel awake and motivated to start the day. Without that morning cortisol rise, you remain groggy, your ability to focus is reduced, and dopamine signaling is blunted. The intensity and quality of light matter. Sunlight is by far the most effective because it provides levels of brightness and wavelength distribution that artificial indoor lights cannot replicate. Even on cloudy days, natural daylight outdoors is many times brighter than the lighting inside a typical room. This is why stepping outside and letting your eyes be exposed to that brightness is one of the fastest ways to increase alertness. Artificial light can also help if you are in a dark environment or during times when the sun is not available, but the goal is to seek the highest intensity possible without discomfort to the eyes. Bright, overhead lights that mimic the spectrum of daylight can be particularly effective. Timing is another critical element. Light exposure early in the day sets in motion biological cascades that regulate not only immediate alertness, but also your ability to fall asleep at night. That timing also sets the rhythm for dopamine release throughout the day. The earlier you get strong light exposure, the more your brain aligns to a natural rhythm of energy in the morning and calm in the evening. But even outside of morning routines, light can be leveraged acutely. If you feel a slump in energy or motivation in the middle of the day, a burst of light exposure can rapidly shift your state. Studies show that light stimulates the locus coeruleus, a brainstem area that triggers norepinephrine release. This mechanism is why stepping into sunlight for even just a few minutes can make you feel significantly more alert. What makes light so unique compared to stimulants like caffeine is that it works on the foundational level of your biology rather than artificially overriding it. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, which makes you feel less tired, but it doesn't align your system to its natural rhythms. Light, by contrast, engages the natural circuits of arousal and motivation. It literally signals your brain that it is time to be awake, to orient toward action, and to engage with the world. In doing so, it creates a foundation for dopamine release that is healthier and more sustainable than relying solely on chemical stimulants. The effects of light are not limited to alertness alone. They also prime the brain for learning and motivation. Dopamine release in response to light exposure enhances your willingness to pursue goals, even small ones. This is because dopamine acts as a signal that the environment is rich with opportunities and worth engaging in. Without sufficient light exposure, dopamine tone in the brain drops, which can manifest as low motivation, fatigue, or even mild depressive symptoms. People often underestimate how much their environment, particularly light, shapes their mood and drive. By deliberately using light as a tool, you can reverse those states almost instantly. There is also an interaction between light and posture or behavior. When you combine light exposure with upright posture and even mild movement, the signaling to the brain's arousal circuits becomes even stronger. For example, walking outside in sunlight combines three powerful levers: movement, light, and visual flow. Together, they create a state shift that is greater than the sum of its parts. Walking outdoors in the morning sun, even for just 5 to 10 minutes, can set your entire system into an energized, motivated mode that lasts for hours. Light exposure also has protective effects against fatigue over the course of the day. Studies demonstrate that individuals who receive sufficient bright light early and periodically throughout the day experience fewer energy crashes in the afternoon. This is due to the way light exposure regulates circadian rhythms and neurotransmitter release. By giving your body the proper signals of time of day, you prevent the drift into sluggishness that occurs when those signals are weak or absent. In practical terms, using light for instant alertness can be as simple as stepping outside and facing the sky for 2 to 5 minutes. You don't need to look directly at the sun. In fact, you should avoid doing so. Instead, allow your eyes to take in the broad field of light. If sunlight is not available, using a bright light device with a color temperature close to natural daylight can replicate some of these effects. Positioning that light overhead rather than at desk level is key, because overhead light more effectively engages the biological circuits tied to alertness. The power of light lies in its immediacy. Unlike supplements or long routines, light can shift your state within moments. This is why it is a protocol worth emphasizing for anyone who needs instant motivation and alertness. When you start to understand light not just as illumination, but as a biological tool, you gain access to one of the most potent and accessible ways to control your brain state. Breathing is one of the fastest and most powerful levers you can use to shift your state of mind and body toward motivation and alertness. Unlike many other biological systems, breathing is both automatic and under conscious control. This unique dual nature means that by deliberately altering how you breathe, you can send direct signals to your nervous system, changing your level of energy, focus, and readiness almost instantly. While many people think of breathing simply as a way to bring oxygen into the body and remove carbon dioxide, the reality is that the patterns of your breathing influence the activity of the brain regions that govern arousal, stress, and motivation. The nervous system has two broad states it can occupy: sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic state is often described as fight or flight, but that oversimplifies its role. It is also the system that heightens alertness, mobilizes energy, and prepares you for action. The parasympathetic system, on the other hand, brings calm and recovery. Breathing is one of the few tools that allows you to toggle between these states at will. If you want to feel more alert and motivated, you can use specific breathing patterns to increase sympathetic activation. If you want to reduce anxiety and clear mental clutter to focus, you can use another set of breathing patterns to quickly downshift parasympathetic activity. This control is immediate, reliable, and available anywhere without equipment. One of the most effective breathing techniques for boosting alertness and motivation is cyclic hyperventilation. This involves taking a series of deep inhales through the nose or mouth, followed by relaxed, passive exhales. Typically, you would do 20 to 30 of these breaths in succession. Each inhale should be full, drawing the diaphragm downward and expanding the chest, while the exhale is more relaxed, simply letting the air fall out. After this series of breaths, you may pause and hold your breath for a short period until you feel the natural urge to breathe again. What happens during this practice is a temporary reduction of carbon dioxide in the blood, which shifts blood pH and increases neural excitability. The result is a pronounced surge in energy, a sense of alertness, and often an elevated mood. It is a state-shifting tool that can be used to break out of fatigue or low motivation within minutes. Another powerful breathing protocol for instant alertness is the physiological sigh. This is a pattern your body already uses spontaneously, often during sleep or after crying. It consists of 2 quick inhales through the nose, one deep inhale followed immediately by a second, smaller inhale, and then a long, extended exhale through the mouth. This pattern works by reinflating the alveoli, the small sacs in the lungs that sometimes collapse, improving oxygen exchange, and also stimulating neurons in the brainstem that reduce stress signals. The result is a rapid calming of internal agitation, which paradoxically increases your ability to focus and mobilize effort. When motivation is low because of stress or mental clutter, the physiological sigh is one of the fastest ways to clear the system and create space for renewed drive. Breathing also directly influences heart rate through what is known as respiratory sinus arrhythmia. When you inhale, your heart rate speeds up slightly. When you exhale, it slows down. This means that by extending your inhales relative to your exhales, you can increase arousal. And by extending your exhales relative to your inhales, you can reduce stress. For instant motivation and alertness, emphasizing longer, more forceful inhales and shorter, quicker exhales can rapidly shift the balance toward heightened energy. On the other hand, if nervousness or anxiety is blocking motivation, longer exhalations can restore balance and clear away that resistance. The key is that breathing provides a precise, moment-to-moment control over your internal state. Another aspect of breathing that supports motivation is its effect on focus. Rapid, shallow breathing is associated with fragmented attention and anxiety, while deliberate, deep breathing creates coherence in brain activity, especially in the prefrontal cortex. This is the region of the brain responsible for planning, goal setting, and persistence, all critical for motivation. By engaging in structured breathing exercises, you are not only changing your body's arousal level, but also directly priming the brain's executive centers for action. There is also a profound psychological effect of deliberate breathing. When you take control of your breath, you experience an immediate sense of agency over your internal state. This creates a feedback loop. As you feel more in control, your confidence in your ability to act increases, which itself is a motivator. Breathing, therefore, is not just a physiological lever, but also a psychological one. It trains you to recognize that you are not at the mercy of your environment or your emotions. You can intervene and shift yourself into the state required for performance. For practical application, even brief sessions of 2 to 3 minutes of focused breathing can completely alter your level of alertness. For instance, performing a round of cyclic hyperventilation can serve as a pre-task ritual before doing cognitively demanding work or physical training. A single physiological sigh can be used in real time to reset during moments of mental fatigue or procrastination. The accessibility of these tools makes them uniquely valuable. Unlike exercise, which requires more time and space or light, which depends on the environment, breathing can be done anywhere and at any moment, making it an ideal protocol for on-demand motivation. The science supporting these practices is robust. Research from neuroscience and physiology shows that breathing patterns modulate activity in the locus coeruleus, the same brainstem nucleus activated by light exposure. This area releases norepinephrine, which enhances alertness and attention. Other studies demonstrate that controlled breathing regulates the vagus nerve, influencing parasympathetic tone and thereby balancing stress and readiness. These findings confirm that breathing is not just a relaxation practice, but a tool for precision control of brain-body states. When thinking about motivation and alertness, it is important to recognize that the brain and body are not separate systems. They are deeply interconnected. Breathing is the bridge between them. By taking conscious control of this automatic process, you are tapping into a system designed to adapt you to your environment. Whether the challenge in front of you requires heightened energy or focused calm, breathing protocols allow you to engineer the state you need within minutes. Cold exposure is one of the most potent and immediate tools available to rapidly shift the state of the body and brain toward alertness and motivation. When the body is suddenly exposed to cold, whether through immersion in cold water, a cold shower, or even brief contact with cold air, a cascade of physiological reactions occurs. These reactions are not mild. They are robust, fast, and measurable. What makes cold exposure so unique is the way it activates neuromodulators that directly influence mood, focus, and drive, particularly norepinephrine and dopamine. These chemicals create not only a short-term surge in alertness, but also a lasting elevation in motivation that can persist for hours after the exposure ends. The initial sensation of cold activates temperature-sensitive nerve endings in the skin. These signals travel through the peripheral nervous system and converge on the spinal cord and brainstem, triggering an immediate response from the sympathetic nervous system. This is the same system that mobilizes the body during moments of stress or high demand. Heart rate increases, blood vessels constrict, and breathing often becomes more rapid. These are signs of heightened arousal and alertness. But beyond these surface reactions, cold exposure activates deeper neurochemical pathways that set the stage for motivation. One of the key chemicals released during cold exposure is norepinephrine. This neurotransmitter and hormone acts across the brain and body to heighten alertness, sharpen focus, and prepare the system for action. Studies show that norepinephrine levels can increase 2 to 3 times above baseline during cold exposure. Importantly, this surge is not just fleeting. It helps sustain elevated levels of energy and readiness long after the cold stimulus has ended. For someone seeking instant motivation, this provides a rapid and reliable lever to shift from lethargy into a state of engagement. Equally important is the role of dopamine. Cold exposure has been shown to cause a substantial increase in dopamine release, sometimes more than doubling baseline levels. Dopamine is the key neuromodulator of motivation, reward, and drive. Unlike the short-lived spike of norepinephrine, dopamine elevations from cold exposure can last for several hours. This is significant because it not only boosts immediate motivation, but also increases the willingness to pursue tasks and goals over a longer period. The lingering effect on dopamine tone creates a powerful foundation for maintaining focus and drive throughout the day. The combination of norepinephrine and dopamine release is what makes cold exposure such a uniquely effective tool. Norepinephrine heightens alertness, keeping the brain sharp and tuned to the environment, while dopamine creates the sense of motivation and reward anticipation that propels behavior forward. Together, they create a state that is both energized and purpose-driven. This dual effect is not commonly found in other practices that increase alertness but do not necessarily boost motivation. Cold exposure directly targets both systems simultaneously. From a physiological perspective, the stress induced by cold exposure is a form of controlled hormesis. Hormesis refers to the process by which brief, tolerable stressors stimulate the body and brain to adapt in beneficial ways. Unlike chronic stress, which can deplete motivation and wear down resilience, acute stressors like cold trigger adaptive responses that make the system stronger and more resilient over time. This means that the more regularly one engages with cold exposure, the more effective the nervous system becomes at mobilizing motivation and maintaining alertness in response to challenges. In this way, cold exposure not only provides immediate benefits, but also trains the body and brain to respond more effectively to future demands. The effects of cold exposure are not limited to chemistry and neural circuits alone. There is also a significant psychological component. When you willingly expose yourself to cold, you are engaging in an act of deliberate discomfort. This action trains the mind to lean into challenge rather than avoid it. Each time you step into a cold shower or immerse yourself in cold water, you are reinforcing the neural circuits associated with resilience, discipline, and follow-through. This creates a powerful psychological shift. You learn to associate discomfort with growth and reward, which directly translates into greater motivation for other difficult tasks. Practical application of cold exposure can take many forms. A full immersion in cold water, such as an ice bath or a cold plunge, produces the strongest effects as it activates a larger surface area of cold, sensitive nerve endings simultaneously. However, even a brief cold shower of 1 to 3 minutes can produce significant increases in norepinephrine and dopamine. What matters most is consistency and the willingness to embrace the discomfort fully. The body responds most strongly to sudden, intense exposure rather than gradual adaptation, which means that the initial shock of cold is part of what makes the practice effective. The duration of exposure is another important variable. While prolonged cold exposure can be dangerous and is not necessary for motivation, short bouts in the range of 1 to 5 minutes are sufficient to trigger the neurochemical cascade. These brief exposures create lasting benefits without the risks of hypothermia or overexertion. Many people find that even a single minute of cold showering in the morning is enough to completely shift their state from grogginess to alertness, providing the mental clarity needed to start the day. It is also worth noting that cold exposure interacts with breathing and mindset. When you first enter cold water, the body often triggers a gasp reflex and rapid breathing. Learning to control your breath during this initial phase, slowing it down and stabilizing your exhale, enhances the benefits of the exposure. This practice engages the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for deliberate control and decision making. By using breath to stay calm in the cold, you reinforce your ability to regulate stress in other areas of life, making motivation more accessible even under pressure. Research on cold exposure has shown additional benefits beyond immediate motivation and alertness, including reductions in inflammation, improved mood, and enhanced resilience to stress. While these are long-term adaptations, they contribute indirectly to maintaining higher levels of motivation by reducing fatigue and improving overall brain and body function. But the most immediate and striking benefit remains the powerful surge of alertness and drive that comes from the neurochemical response to cold. Cold exposure is, in essence, a protocol that compresses a large shift in state into a very short period of time. In just a few minutes, it can elevate norepinephrine and dopamine to levels that transform lethargy into motivation and fogginess into clarity. It engages the nervous system at its most fundamental levels, both chemically and psychologically, to create a state optimized for action. The way you hold your body and the way you move through space are far more than physical behaviors. They are direct signals to the brain about what state you should be in. Posture and movement act as neural levers that can instantly shift levels of alertness, focus, and motivation. This is because the nervous system does not operate in isolation inside the skull. It is constantly receiving feedback from the muscles, joints, and sensory organs about how the body is positioned and what it is doing. That feedback loops back into brain circuits that regulate mood, energy, and drive. By consciously changing posture or engaging in specific types of movement, you can generate rapid changes in your mental state that support motivation and alertness. Posture, in particular, carries a powerful influence. When the spine is upright, shoulders are back, and the chest is open, sensory neurons in the muscles and joints relay information to the brainstem and midbrain that is interpreted as a state of readiness. This posture increases activity in brain regions associated with confidence, focus, and approach behaviors. In contrast, when the body is slouched forward, the chest collapsed, and the head tilted downward, the feedback sent to the brain is interpreted as fatigue, defeat, or disengagement. This is not just metaphorical. Studies in embodied cognition have demonstrated that people who adopt upright, expansive postures show measurable increases in testosterone and decreases in cortisol, hormones that affect drive and resilience. By simply adjusting the body's posture, you are directly influencing neurochemistry linked to motivation. Movement amplifies these effects. Rhythmic movement, such as walking, jogging, or cycling, activates a phenomenon known as optic flow. As you move forward and visual images stream past your eyes, neurons in the visual cortex and midbrain detect that flow and send signals to the amygdala and other stress-related centers of the brain. The result is a reduction in internal stress and an increase in focus. This is why walking outdoors is such an effective way to clear mental clutter and increase alertness. The combination of upright posture, rhythmic forward movement, and optic flow creates a trifecta of neural inputs that push the brain toward a state of engagement and readiness. Short bouts of intense movement, such as a set of jumping jacks, push-ups, or even a quick sprint in place, can also produce immediate changes in state. These movements rapidly increase heart rate and blood flow, signaling to the brain that the body is in a state of activation. The brain responds by releasing norepinephrine, which sharpens attention, and dopamine, which boosts motivation. This is the same neurochemical profile that cold exposure triggers, but it is achieved through muscular activation and cardiovascular engagement instead of temperature. The benefit is that it can be done anytime and anywhere, making it an accessible protocol for instant state shifts. The mind-body feedback loop is essential to understand here. While it is true that your internal state influences posture and movement, fatigue or stress often causes slouching or stillness. It is equally true that posture and movement influence your internal state. This bidirectional loop means you are never stuck in a low motivation or low alertness state simply because it started in the mind. By using the body as the entry point, you can reverse engineer the state you want to be in. Standing tall, moving rhythmically, or performing a short burst of exercise feeds signals to the nervous system that tell it to increase energy, sharpen focus, and prepare for action. Breathing patterns often change automatically with posture and movement, adding another layer to the effect. When the chest is open and the diaphragm moves freely, breathing becomes deeper and more regular, which stabilizes heart rate and enhances oxygen delivery to the brain. This additional oxygen supply supports cognitive performance and alertness. Conversely, slouched postures restrict breathing, leading to shallow breaths that increase carbon dioxide buildup and can promote lethargy. Thus, posture not only signals readiness through mechanical feedback, but also optimizes breathing, which further supports motivation and alertness. Another important factor is the psychological message that posture and movement send to the self. When you adopt an upright, confident posture, you are not only signaling readiness to the nervous system, but also reinforcing a mental identity of capability and agency. Moving forward physically creates a sensation of moving forward psychologically, reinforcing the idea of progress and momentum. These embodied signals align the brain's motivation circuits with the body's behavior, creating coherence between action and intention. The role of movement in resetting attention is also well established. After periods of stillness, especially when working at a desk or focusing on a screen, alertness naturally declines as neural circuits fatigue. A brief period of physical movement resets those circuits by increasing blood flow and neurochemical release. Even a 2-minute walk or a quick stretch can refresh the brain and restore focus. This is why structured breaks that include movement are far more effective than passive breaks for maintaining productivity and motivation across long periods. The evolutionary basis for these effects is clear. Throughout human history, posture and movement have been reliable indicators of state. An upright posture and forward locomotion signaled engagement with the environment, readiness to hunt, gather, or interact socially. A collapsed posture and stillness often indicated defeat, sickness, or withdrawal. The brain evolved to interpret these signals and adjust neurochemistry accordingly. Today, even though the physical threats and challenges are different, the underlying biology remains the same. You can leverage this evolutionary wiring by deliberately adopting the postures and movements that signal readiness and action. Integrating posture and movement as protocols for instant motivation does not require long or complex routines. Simply standing up tall, opening the chest, and taking a few steps can shift the brain into a more alert state. A short bout of calisthenics or a brisk walk outdoors compounds these effects by engaging cardiovascular and visual systems. The key is to recognize that your body position and movement are not trivial. They are tools for regulating your nervous system in real time. By using them intentionally, you create a powerful lever for motivation and alertness that is always available. One of the most overlooked but powerful levers for instant motivation and alertness is mental framing. The way you frame a situation, a task, or even a moment in time determines how your brain interprets it and what neurochemical responses are triggered. Mental framing is essentially the story you tell yourself about what you are about to do and why it matters. When you learn to direct that framing toward actionable goals, even small ones, you engage the dopamine system of the brain in a way that fuels motivation and drive almost immediately. Unlike external tools such as light, breathing, or cold, mental framing arises from cognition itself, yet it is just as biological in its effects because it taps directly into the neural circuits that control motivation. At the core of this process is dopamine. Dopamine is not just the molecule of reward, as it is often described. It is fundamentally the molecule of anticipation and pursuit. It is released when you orient toward a goal, not only when you achieve it. This means that by simply setting a goal and framing your attention toward the act of pursuing it, you create the neurochemical conditions for motivation. The brain essentially treats the orientation toward a goal as a signal to release dopamine, which then drives the energy to continue. This is why immediate goal orientation is so effective. It doesn't require massive achievements to kickstart the system, just the act of orienting towards something specific and actionable. A key aspect of mental framing is specificity. When the brain has a vague or undefined task in front of it, motivation tends to drop. The dopamine system is most responsive to clear, actionable steps. For example, framing your task as work on the project is too broad and overwhelming, but reframing it as open the document and write one paragraph is specific and achievable. The moment you define that goal, your brain recognizes it as a solvable challenge, and dopamine release begins. The process creates a feedback loop. Small steps achieved reinforce progress, each accompanied by additional dopamine, which sustains motivation. This is why breaking large goals into small, actionable pieces is so effective. It continually primes the brain's motivation system through repeated bursts of dopamine. Alertness also rises as a result of this framing process. When the brain locks onto a specific target, the circuits of selective attention in the prefrontal cortex and parietal cortex become engaged. These areas act as filters, suppressing distractions and amplifying the neural signals relevant to the goal. The result is a heightened state of focus and readiness. This is not just psychological, it is measurable in brain activity. The orientation toward a goal sharpens the activity of the locus coeruleus, which regulates norepinephrine release, the primary chemical of alertness. In this way, mental framing of a task recruits both dopamine and norepinephrine systems, creating a combined state of motivation and alertness. Another important factor in framing is perception of challenge. Motivation is maximized when goals are perceived as difficult but achievable. If a task is framed as too easy, dopamine release is minimal because the brain does not register it as valuable. If the task is framed as impossible, the system does not engage because failure is assumed. But when the task is framed as a real challenge that can be achieved with effort, the dopamine system activates strongly. This explains why people often feel most motivated when pursuing goals that stretch their abilities without overwhelming them. The art of framing is therefore in finding the sweet spot between ease and difficulty, creating an orientation that excites the brain to pursue the task with energy. Framing also influences how setbacks are interpreted. The brain releases dopamine not only for progress, but also in anticipation of progress. If a setback occurs, reframing it as information rather than failure can preserve dopamine release and maintain motivation. For example, instead of viewing a mistake as wasted effort, framing it as feedback shifts the brain's interpretation and keeps the pursuit system engaged. This is crucial for maintaining momentum across longer-term goals, but it also applies to immediate motivation. By consciously choosing the frame through which you interpret difficulties, you preserve the biological conditions needed for continued action. Mental framing works best when coupled with immediate action. Thinking about goals alone can sometimes stay abstract, but the moment you take even a small step, the system is reinforced. This is why the combination of framing and behavior is so effective. For instance, if you frame your day around the goal of learning a concept, and then you immediately sit down and write one sentence about it, dopamine is released both from the framing and from the completion of the small step. This double activation strengthens the system, creating a stronger motivational drive to continue. There is also a role for visualization in mental framing. Visualizing a specific outcome or the process of working toward it recruits many of the same brain circuits as actual action. This primes the nervous system for pursuit. Visualization alone will not sustain motivation, but as a preparatory tool, it can help engage the dopamine system before action begins. When paired with immediate orientation toward a real goal, visualization amplifies the framing effect and makes motivation more accessible. An additional layer comes from the language used in mental framing. The words you choose to describe a goal influence how the brain interprets it. Phrasing that emphasizes action and progress, such as "I am moving toward" or "I am in the process of," creates a stronger sense of agency than static phrasing like "I want" or "I should." This difference in language alters the way the brain's motivation circuits respond, because the system is tuned to pursuit rather than passive desire. By deliberately choosing action-oriented frames, you engage the pursuit circuits more effectively. The practical application of mental framing and immediate goal orientation is simple but powerful. Begin by defining a specific, achievable goal in clear terms. Frame the goal as a meaningful challenge that requires effort but is within reach. Use language that emphasizes action and progress. Then take the first small step immediately, no matter how minimal. This sequence, frame, orient, act, recruits dopamine and norepinephrine systems, producing instant motivation and alertness. Over time, repeating this process trains the brain to enter motivated states more quickly and reliably because the circuits become more efficient through repetition. Mental framing and immediate goal orientation work because they leverage the brain's natural pursuit chemistry. By directing attention and effort towards specific, actionable targets, you align your biology with your intention. This creates a rapid and reliable shift into states of energy, focus, and motivation, demonstrating that the way you frame your experience is one of the most powerful tools you have for controlling your internal state. Instant motivation and alertness are not abstract qualities reserved for moments of inspiration. They are biological states that can be deliberately created by engaging specific systems of the brain and body. Light breathing, cold exposure, posture and movement, and mental framing all serve as protocols that tap into ancient circuits designed to regulate arousal, focus, and drive. Each tool works through distinct pathways, light aligning circadian and dopamine rhythms, breathing directly modulating the autonomic nervous system, cold exposure triggering powerful surges of norepinephrine and dopamine, posture and movement feeding signals of readiness to the brain, and mental framing orienting attention toward achievable goals that activate motivation chemistry. Together, these protocols reveal that motivation and alertness are not left to chance. They are controllable levers available to anyone, anytime. By understanding and applying these methods, you can shift your state in real time, move through challenges with greater clarity, and access the drive required to act with purpose and consistency.